Morning, everyone. I was pondering this morning. I was reading through 4 descriptions that Jesus gives about the kingdom, and I just thought I'd share these thoughts with you this morning, and you can just prayerfully pray through all these little passages. But Jesus describes the kingdom in 4 ways in the book of Matthew, and each just reveals something beautiful about the gospel and about the purpose that Christ has left us on this earth for. But in Matthew 13, the first description he gives, verse 31, he says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches." Then he describes the second one in verse 33. He says, "The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened." Now I'm going to jump to the last 2 descriptions. And in verse 44, Jesus gives a third description. He says, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes out and sells all that he has and buys that field." And then the 4th description Jesus gives here is, "The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and bought it." Here we see 4 beautiful descriptions of the kingdom, and I'll start with the last 2. These were my thoughts this morning. Here we see the second 2 reveal how precious the kingdom is, how precious the gospel is. And here we see one man, individual, in verse 44, who discovers the treasure. It's almost like he's not out looking for it. He finds it in a field. He discovers how precious the kingdom is, how precious and powerful the gospel is in his own life. And he goes and sells everything. He finds such joy in it, and this just is such a beautiful example of someone who discovers how precious Christ is, how precious these truths are, and then just gives their whole life for it, gives up everything to lay hold of it in their lives. And then the second example, it's almost like this merchant is out looking for these treasures. So here it's not that he accidentally discovers it. He's almost out looking for it, this merchant. And this just is a beautiful example of, once we discover how rich and how precious the gospel is and how precious his word is, that we go out and search for it. We go and dig through the scriptures. We go and mine the scriptures for the beauty and the precious truths of the gospel. And as we discover them, we give more and more of our lives to allow the truth of Christ just to take over all of our lives and everything we do in our lives. So we see here in these first 2 examples, I've just given how precious the kingdom is and how valuable it is and how we are to treasure it. In the first 2 that Jesus gives here, we see how the kingdom starts off appearing almost insignificant at first. It's the mustard seed and the leaven. It's not really visible. It's not very obvious, but it has a massive impact. And the example of the leaven, it's how that when the kingdom comes into your heart and it comes into your life and you begin to surrender to Christ, it starts to take over more and more of your life. Just like yeast permeates bread, so the gospel will permeate our lives as we surrender more and more of it. And then the first example, it even goes further. It's the example of the mustard seed. Mustard seed is small, but when it is sown, it becomes this tree that others begin to rest in the branches. It begins to touch the lives of others. And I was pondering, how do you change a community? You simply change a community by, number 1, surrendering your life to Christ. And as we share the kingdom with others, as we share the gospel with others, that seed is sown into other people's lives, and it begins to change their life. And then they share it with someone else, and it begins to change their life. And slowly, the kingdom, where it started in one heart, it begins to move through a community, and that community begins to rest in the branches of that kingdom. And this is how you change a community, a nation, and even the world. You start with yourself. Let's get our hearts right before God. But then we start sharing these precious, valuable truths with those around us. It takes root in their hearts. They discover how precious it is. How precious it is. And they begin to share it with those around them. And slowly the kingdom permeates the whole of society. And people begin to rest in its branches and discover its truth. In the end, people are all bowing their knees and worshiping the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. yeah, that's just some thoughts I had this morning. I trust that you take that time to read through those and just prayerfully ponder them. Have a super day. Cheers.